bourgeoisie produces, above all, art zone. Gravediggers.
Hey everybody, we're back.
Hi everyone, it's Erin.
And it's Amr in Toronto.
And welcome to another episode of Das Kriminal Podcast.
Yeah, we've been, what is it, the 26th, 27th episode?
26th, I believe.
Yay!
Not including bonuses, yeah.
That's a big deal, yeah. We're the quarter of the century.
Yeah, we are. I am still in quarantine, still in my basement hole, much like Saddam.
Be careful not to be discovered by SEAL Team 6 or whoever the hell discovered him.
Well, I sent Amr a video that last night, it sounds like a cat maybe was giving birth outside my door. I woke up to these horrible sounds.
Yeah, it was terrifying. Like I did not like that video in terms of the noises that were being made.
I'm sorry, Amr. I'm sorry for inflicting that on you too, but I couldn't go through it alone.
No, it's okay. Yeah, it was interesting.
We have an interesting topic today, don't we? I feel like the last episode was, of course, such an important one, but also a giant downer. So sometimes it's nice to step away from murder and go into some scandalous true crime.
Yeah, I don't think this is an intense episode by any means.
No, it's not, but it is a story where all the main characters are incredibly unlikable, so I would recommend pouring yourself a drink now.
Yeah, there are no heroes here, let alone good stuff. It's just awfulness.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you've all heard the references and allegations, the accusations, the wild claims, the guesses and the suspicions. In fact, you've probably seen Rachel Maddow scream about Russia interfering with US elections at MSNBC at least once over what feels like a century ago, but was only actually 4 years ago. We've seen terms like interference, kompromat, and leaks. These terms have been drilled into our heads. For all the countless hours pundits have debated quote-unquote Russiagate on CNN, it still remains as baffling and utterly incomprehensible as ever. But fortunately for you, our dear listeners, Erin and I are here to address the entire debacle and present it to you in podcast form.
Yay!
Not
yay.
I mean, kind of, yeah. I mean, at least the American administration are giving us content to research. That's good.
Crimes of America and Crimes of Brits, both the Twitter accounts, but more the things that they have done are just content farms.
Yeah, I mean, not even like the actual stuff, but like, yeah, in general, like I feel like in a world without crime, we'd be without business. So in a way, we're kind of like part of the game, if you will, of crime.
If you can't beat them, at least try to profit.
Yeah.
That's capitalism, baby.
Well, I mean, firstly, I just want to go on a tangent here and express my really, really deep annoyance with the phenomenon of adding the suffix gate to any given conspiracy. I've mentioned this before on the pod with Pizzagate. The suffix gate originates from the Watergate scandal, obviously, which revealed that President Richard Nixon at the time was secretly recording his rival political party, the Democrats, who were headquartered in the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. The name Watergate is a full name in and of itself. It is the proper title of a location. So just slapping gate as a suffix on any fucking thing is really lazy, it's boring, it's annoying, it makes me really upset. Stop it.
I agree with you, Amr. And I also want to point out that Russiagate is lazy because we're not even really talking about one specific thing like Watergate was. It's kind of a bunch of events that sort of surround the Trump campaign and later administration, and then Russia and Ukraine. But it's describing, we'll talk about it, but it's describing more than one thing.
There are multiple things, yeah.
When we were doing our research for this episode, I noticed something strange right off the bat that I just want to quickly bring attention to. The Wikipedia articles for, quote, Russian interference in the 2016 United States elections, end quote, and, open quote, timeline of Russian interference in the 2016 United States elections, end quote. These are some of the longest and most detailed Wikipedia articles I've ever seen in my life. And keep in mind that anyone can edit Wikipedia. So for reference, the article for Russian interference contains over 8 times more references than the article for the 1917 Russian Revolution. That's just weird to me. It's very weird.
Yeah, somewhere in hell, Louise Mensch is smiling at this.
Everything about this case is strange. Nothing adds up. There's no smoking gun, but there are definitely a lot of terrible people with terrible motives. So we're going to do our best to break down for you who those people are and what those motives are and what people might mean when they say Russiagate. Are they talking about Russian troll farms creating fake Facebook content to sow disillusion? Are they talking about the hacking and release of the DNC and Clinton campaign's emails via WikiLeaks? Are they talking about shady business deals and meetings between high-level Trump campaign managers and Russia?
Are they talking about the extreme end of the spectrum where they question whether Russia's FSB, which is the successor to the KGB, secretly recorded sex workers peeing on Donald Trump during his visit to Russia in 2013 when Russia was hosting the Miss Universe pageants, and then using the tape to blackmail Trump? I don't know. This part is really confusing. And then you have the even more extreme than that are fringe lunatics who believe that Donald Trump was sort of prepared or trained as a Manchurian candidate by Russia since the 90s to infiltrate US politics and become president. Again, nothing on the supposed ends beyond some abstract, like, weakening American democracy nonsense.
It's interesting. It kind of follows this Joker-esque nihilism where it's like, what's the point? Chaos is the point.
Yeah, like a fucking annoying, like the Michael Caine bit where he goes like, some people just want to watch the world burn.
I think that's supposed to be the point. I'm not kidding.
It's bizarre. It's weird. It's also like, I don't know, it turns people so paranoid, and like, this is like the extreme denial that gets into their brains like worms. The American public could not possibly elect Trump so willingly, so normally.
Yes, and that is the message that we're really going to start to dig at throughout this episode, to kind of pull that thread and see where it takes us. So we're going to do our best to discuss all of these affiliated points, what evidence exists to support or refute them, and why we think it should or shouldn't matter. Is this all the end of the world's most imperial democracy? Is it a hoax? Is Vladimir Putin really hiding under Rachel Maddow's bed, waiting until she stands up so he can grab her ankles and yell, "Popolsha!"
Is that how you pronounce it? Popolchak? Yeah.
I think so.
When I was reading the notes, I was like, Popolsaya? What's Popolsaya?
I think it's Popolsha.
Okay.
It means like, boo, surprise.
Yeah, I mean, Rachel Maddow probably checks her bed and closet every night before going to bed.
I have a grandmother that speaks Polish. She might know, but she never calls me. I don't... Grandma, if you're listening to this.
Yeah, please do call in and correct us.
Join us for a journey into the pits of American politics. Part 1 to our little story is this saga of Trump Tower Moscow, which, if you're just hearing of it now, that's because it was never built, so don't feel bad. It only exists in theory. On November 9th, 2013, Donald Trump sets the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow and schedules a performance by Azerbaijani pop star Amin Agalarov. Amin's father, Aras Agalarov, is a billionaire developer with strong ties in Moscow. Trump hopes that Vladimir Putin will attend the pageant, but Putin gets stuck in a traffic jam. Nonetheless, the Trump Organization and Agalarov's corporation sign a letter of intent to construct a Trump Tower in Moscow.
Okay, first of all, I want to put it out there that my position is that all pageants should be banned. They're complete bourgeois decadence and also really creepy to judge children by their beauty. During this pageant, Trump stayed at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Moscow, and supposedly he hired two Russian sex workers to pee on the bed in the hotel that the Obamas had slept on when they stayed there. I'm not quite sure if Trump was also peed on himself. The allegations don't quite distinguish. But there's peeing and there's sex workers and there's a bed. And that bed supposedly was the same bed Obama slept in. And the allegation, most prominently advanced by notable human worm hybrid Jonathan Chait, goes that the FSB had rigged the entire hotel with wires and cameras, as you do in Russia, and really anywhere in the world. And they recorded Trump and the pissing sex workers, and then they're using these tapes, like Putin is personally using these tapes to blackmail him. But the counterpoint to that is if the tape is real, I struggle to see how it's been used to influence US politics internationally, because the only possible case where it may have been applied is in Syria, in pressuring the US not to intervene more directly or like send more troops or whatever. Even then, that's beyond the point because A, the US shouldn't intervene anyway since it's backing jihadi death squads, and B, Trump's rhetoric on non-intervention. And yes, words are cheap. And yes, to be fair to him, he hasn't started a new war in his 4 terms in office, which is something Obama can't claim. But non-intervention is quite popular among a certain segment of the US population. So, I mean, the US reducing its intervention in Syria is good. We should support that. It's a thing desired by many Americans as far as my research goes. And regardless of the piss tape, if it leads to less intervention, then good. And aside from that, I don't think of any other example where the US did something particularly different to its normal foreign policy.
I think my issue here is that it frames the Syrian civil war and other sort of global events as this Trump-Russia thing when they're not. Like, it completely strips away the actual context. And Trump has actually really effectively kind of sown this myth of non-intervention. But if we look at what he's done, he has reduced military intervention in Syria more recently, but in his first months in office, he expanded operations to target Syrian government forces, such as the Shayrat air base. He's also said he wants to maintain a continuous US presence in Syria to counter Iranian influence, and he famously ordered the strike on Qasem Soleimani. Not to mention, regarding imperialism, a coup and attempted coup in Bolivia and Venezuela, respectively. So Trump's foreign and military policies are all over the place, and it's hard to pin them down as interventionist, non-interventionist, what have you. I'd say they're imperialist, but he's certainly not a dove. Besides, Trump's base didn't vote for him because they want peace in the Middle East, especially since he's explicitly pro-Israel and anti-Iran. They voted for him because he's a white nationalist.
Well, yeah, and I agree on that point, and I think they also voted on him. A segment at least voted for him because he's always on TV, and Americans love what's on TV. On the coup in Bolivia, from what I understood researching, Canada was actually the driving force behind that, not America, including then and current Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland. As far as his botched attempts at doing imperialism, yes, he's not a dove. Yes, he hasn't really reduced military intervention in Syria until recently. But like my standard for him is compared to like someone like Hillary Clinton, who is, I guess, more efficient, more ruthless, and definitely more palatable to the American public in that if Hillary was president, and you know, it's again, these are all like ifs and buts, I do think she would have done a lot more to intervene in Syria as well as elsewhere. And the attempted coup in Venezuela wouldn't have gone so disastrously. So I guess, I don't know. I mean, I do agree, you're right, though. Like, I don't think his base voted for him because he's a hippie. I think they voted for him. I mean, the evangelicals definitely voted for him because he's pro-Israel and they believe in, like, the rapture or whatever the hell. And the rest of them vote for him because he is a white nationalist, conservative freak. But yeah, I can't think of an example where such a tape would have been used to completely change US policies abroad.
My problem with sort of directly comparing Trump and Hillary Clinton's foreign policy records is that Trump only recently got into national politics, whereas Hillary Clinton is a career politician. And therefore, we're comparing her tenure as Secretary of State to his being a giant landlord in New York City. So I think that kind of clouds, and this is not to let Hillary Clinton off the hook for anything. She supported Saudi Arabia's genocidal war on Yemen. Like, she did horrible things in Libya. That's inexcusable. But I think he's at an advantage because he can say things like, oh, I didn't support the Iraq war, because he wouldn't have voted for or against it because he wasn't in politics.
Well, also, he wouldn't have been able to point out Iraq on a map at the time.
Exactly. But that's sort of my issue is like, we can easily point to Hillary Clinton and say, yeah, she's a hawk. Look at all this stuff we've done. But I think Trump, if he had been in politics as long as her, would have an equally bad or worse record.
Yeah, probably. I think what's interesting about Trump is his crass way of doing imperialism. You know, he constantly goes on about how other NATO countries aren't paying him and America enough. And when he talks about Iraq, but that's the other thing, when he talks about Iraq, his opposition isn't like, you know, we killed a lot of Iraqi people and that's wrong or whatever. Or even like, you know, Americans died. His opposition is like, we didn't get paid enough. We should have gone in there and taken all the oil or whatever. Like, it's crass. Like, he is the perfect distillation of the American corrupt tycoon persona, where he's just like, yeah, we should have gone in there and taken more oil. That's the mistake in Iraq, not the fact that it's a war crime.
Yeah, he's not in any way whatsoever a principled anti-imperialist, and I find it super strange that people valorize him as such. It's bizarre.
Yeah, oh, definitely, yeah.
So let's bring our minds back to this meeting, November 2013. Donald Trump signs this agreement that they're going to try to bring a Trump Tower to Moscow. And this is all in its beginning stages. Now, initially, the Obama administration had seemed to want to thaw relations with Russia. In April of 2010, they signed the New START Treaty, the USA and Russia, pledging to reduce their nuclear arsenals. In December of 2011, Vladimir Putin is reelected as president of Russia. Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton suggests the election may have been fraudulent.
Yeah, and I mean, from what I understand, Hillary Clinton was always the most hawkish member of Obama's cabinet. Even like in Syria, as we just discussed, she was instantly pressing to go all in, whereas, hell, Biden, of all people, was urging restraint.
This accusation by Hillary Clinton, of course, does not help diplomatic relations between the United States and Russia. In November of 2013, protests erupt in Ukraine after President Viktor Yanukovych suspends the signing of an association agreement with the European Union and instead decides to strengthen economic ties with Russia. Putin chalks these protests up to a Western conspiracy.
Okay, look, I don't want to defend the guy, but in fairness to Putin, there's a good to fair chance of this. Longtime listeners will remember our episode on the overthrow of Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, where the CIA proxies in Tehran were literally handing out wads of cash to people to riot. More recently, many of the so-called color revolutions in former Soviet states have similar signs, disturbing signs of US meddling, including, you know, bribing people to protest.
It's the boy who cried wolf. Once you stage coups like that, then it's so hard to tell if you're meddling again, and people won't believe you, and why would we?
Yeah, exactly.
By this point, Hillary Clinton is no longer Secretary of State. She resigned, and John Kerry took the position, but she did write in her departure memo that reconciling with Russia would no longer happen, which seems like a bold thing to write considering she's leaving. Like, usually in your exit interview, you don't set policy.
Yeah, you just thank people for, like, you know, doing the job. Fuck me, she's so arrogant.
It's like in your exit interview from McDonald's, writing like, you have to bring back the McRib.
You have to bring back the Szechuan sauce.
So in February 2014, Russia moves to annex Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula, incorporating it as part of the Russian Federation on March 18, 2014. The United States and European Union place sanctions on Russia, and these sanctions undermine Trump's plan for his Moscow tower. This brings us to sort of our third puzzle piece in this mini image that we're starting to piece together. Trump shops around for developers anyway, and enlists a business acquaintance named Felix Sater to help him. Now, the word shady doesn't even begin to describe Felix Sater. In 1991, Sater stabbed a guy in the face and neck with the stem of a cocktail glass, causing injuries that needed 110 stitches to treat, and he served 15 months in prison for that.
In America, or?
Yeah, in Brighton Beach.
Oh, okay.
Horrifying, though.
He sounds like a Grand Theft Auto character.
Oh, he's like a mafia guy. That's it. That's straight up it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And we know this because in 1998, Sater was convicted of fraud for his involvement in a Russian mafia scheme. Felix Sater was supposed to help Trump secure a deal and get the Russian government's approval to build the Trump Tower in Moscow. In 2015, during Donald Trump's presidential campaign, Jeff Horowitz of the Associated Press asked Trump about Felix Sater, and Trump pretended to not have heard of him. Trump also repeatedly said during the campaign that he had no business dealings in Russia.
Okay, this part actually surprised me considering Trump's famously senile habit of literally outright claiming he knows members of the New York Mafia during various interviews prior to his presidential run, where he'll be like, yeah, and then I built this building by sitting down and talking to the member of the Mafia.
Meanwhile, Felix Sater is just going on television and being like, yeah, I know Donald Trump. I've been doing business with the Trump Organization in Moscow.
Oh, man.
So in testimony to Congress in November of 2018, Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, who also happens to be Felix Sater's childhood friend, claimed that Trump had been trying to secure a deal for Trump Tower Moscow until at least June 2016, and possibly right up until the end of his campaign. Putting all of this together, what do we know? Well, it definitely seems like Donald Trump previously tried to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. That seems pretty clear and undisputed. What is likely is that he continued trying to secure a deal for the construction of this building during his presidential campaign, despite claiming to the public that he had no business interest in Russia and didn't know Felix Sater. Claiming that he didn't know Felix Sater is probably the sketchiest thing to me.
I genuinely believe he doesn't remember. I genuinely believe he's demented, but that's a whole other thing altogether.
What is more speculation is that Donald Trump cozied up to Vladimir Putin and Russia during his presidential campaign to forge a favorable deal for the construction of Trump Tower Moscow. If this is the case, why have the plans for the tower been scrapped, though? I suppose it's possible they couldn't make a deal, but there is no Trump Tower Moscow. So it didn't work.
Yeah.
Though his behavior is certainly sketchy, nobody has been able to prove that Donald Trump ran on a quote-unquote soft toward Putin platform to secure a Trump Tower Moscow deal.
Yeah, exactly. I second that. And to that point, he has done nothing in office to suggest he's particularly soft on Russia. Sure, he's less hawkish than Hillary Clinton. But I mean, considering Clinton would have had drones over St. Petersburg by now, is that really a bad thing? It seems convoluted for Trump to run for office just to get enough leverage to build a dumb, ostentatious tower. Granted, he is crass and vulgar and sleazy enough to actually think this would be a genius plan. But I don't buy it. I don't buy that bit.
It would have been the tallest building in Europe as well.
At the time, right? Or still?
I think still. I don't know what the tallest building in Europe is now, but it would have allegedly been.
Yeah, I mean, the other part of that for me is that every US president uses their presidency to make money, whether it's after, before, whatever. Trump is just crass about it. That's what liberals don't like. I mean, Obama isn't getting millions of dollars from Netflix to do his show because he's a hilarious comedian.
Yeah, but Obama didn't use his time in office to secure business deals for his private corporation.
Don't get me wrong, it is corruption. But I think it's the sort of thing that a certain class of Americans, I guess, admire in a weird, convoluted way. They love his sleaziness. They love the fact that he's a fucking used car salesman type, just like they are. The reason they like him so much is because he has things like a golden toilet. So in their heads, they're like, yeah, if I had $1 billion, I'd definitely get golden toilets. It's all fucking vulgar.
Let's move on to part 2 of our big analysis here. So on April 15th, 2015, Hillary Rodham Clinton formally announces her presidential campaign. On June 16th, 2015, Donald J. Trump formally announces his presidential campaign. And we all know how that ended up for both of them. Russia has long had an army of internet trolls, sometimes known as the web brigades. Troll farms, however, are not unique to Russia. From Wikipedia, quote, state-sponsored online sock puppetry and manipulation of online views is practiced by several countries, in particular by the United States, Russia, China, United Kingdom, Israel, Turkey, Iran, Vietnam, India, Serbia, and Ukraine, end quote. We discussed this on our most recent bonus episode, but the US Army uses online manipulation via Twitch video game streaming to spread propaganda to teenagers in our own country. We can't forget that.
Yeah, but the difference being to these liberals is that when America does something, it's good inherently because America doing it. But when those, sneaky Slavs do it, it's Asiatic conspiracy.
With army recruiting, I don't think that's the case. I think it's actually even more insidious than that. Americans don't have a problem with army recruiters so long as they're not trying to snatch up their kids. As long as they're going for poor kids, black kids, kids in rougher neighborhoods, that's fine with them.
Yeah. You never see these recruiters in fucking, posh private schools, eh?
No, I went to a public school, but I went to a public school in a mostly white middle class area, and we did not have army recruiters in our schools.
Fucking hell.
According to a 2018 report commissioned by the United States Senate Intelligence Committee, the Russian government used tactics like fake news and memes to increase the United States political divide. And I mean, my reaction to that is kind of like, so?
Yeah, I mean, my reaction to this, if US democracy is so fragile, it could be subverted by a dozen minion memes on Facebook, then with all due respect, it deserves to collapse. Also, the US political divide has been a festering tumor for a long time before memes on Facebook became a thing. And it's a complete misunderstanding of politics and the execution of power by different conflicting interest groups to blame political division on memes. Not to go all Marxist, but the history of all hitherto existing society, blah, 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 blah. Memes didn't create political division.
No, exactly. And I think we have a much bigger problem as well where those sort of things work. We need to look harder at why apparently fake news and memes on Facebook are such an effective way of, radicalizing people. And to put it into a different perspective, people have been radicalized to join ISIS on Facebook. It's extremely disturbing that we have a platform, any platform, where people can be brought into cults and extremist views and anti-vax ideologies.
Yeah, well, it goes back to these weird Silicon Valley type libertarians and their freakish ideology, including their thing that's our platform is we uphold absolute free speech, which A, they don't actually. Try talking about Palestine. And B, it's disturbing how we've reached that point. So the idea of the internet initially, it was this idea that everyone can have a voice, but everyone can have a voice can also be fucked up when, your weird anti-vax aunt gets a voice to talk about how vaccines are Bill Gates' way of thinning the population.
Yeah, there are a lot of disturbing things with Facebook, with Cambridge Analytica, of course. I don't think we can just throw away how these things do influence our politics, but I guess the point that I think we're both trying to make is fascism was already on the rise in the United States, and just because this is the platform where it's now festering doesn't mean that it's Russia's fault.
The memes and stuff had to have had a receptive audience, a fertile soil, if you will.
And to sort of steal from Michael Brooks, rest in peace, as I think we will again throughout this episode, Russia did not shoot Michael Brown in Ferguson. Russia did not do these things. This is us. We need to look in the mirror. And if Russia did spread propaganda on Facebook specifically targeting Americans of, I don't know, certain political beliefs, like, yeah, that's sketchy, that's shady. I'm not saying that's a good thing at all, but there is a much bigger problem here than someone sitting in a cubicle in St. Petersburg typing on Reddit.
Yeah, and I mean, to that point as well, I think there's a larger conversation to be had about the American electoral system, like in terms of like, gerrymandering, not having enough machines in like urban areas, minority areas, long lines on campuses.
Not having the day off.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like that's a fucking insane thing. When we talk about those memes or whatever, it's not like America didn't already have a fundamentally non-democratic system of voting in the first place.
In September of 2015, the FBI notifies the Democratic National Committee, or DNC, that at least one computer in their network has been hacked. The FBI claims the DNC was one target among many for a group of Russian hackers from a syndicate called APT-28, which means Advanced Persistent Threat 28. It does not mean Apartment 28. The B in Apartment 28. In March of 2016, APT-28 sends John Podesta, the chairman of the Clinton campaign, a fake email requesting that he reset his Gmail password due to suspicious activity on his account. Podesta clicks the link, and it gives APT-28 access to lots of information about the Clinton campaign through Podesta's account. On July 22, 2016, Julian Assange of WikiLeaks announces that the organization will publish emails that had been hacked from the DNC. This happens the day before the Democratic National Convention, when Hillary expects to be nominated. On October 7th, 2016, WikiLeaks announces that they will release John Podesta's emails as well.
Okay, keep in mind that none of the emails discussed are fake. They're not fabricated, they're not photoshopped, they're not created from scratch. The DNC and Hillary in particular are simply mad because secret emails showing various shady behavior and general soullessness have been made public.
I don't think they're necessarily secret emails, they're private emails within the campaign. But I don't think that the emails were that big of a deal to most voters. I think the association between Hillary Clinton's name and emails is a big deal. But people generally expect that campaigners will privately have snide things to say about their opponents. I think that on the list of reasons Hillary Clinton lost, this is not that high.
Oh, absolutely. I think it provides the Clinton campaign and Hillary in particular with a really easy out to blame the emails and like blame the hack that dumped the emails instead of like taking a hard look at themselves and how they failed by, not going to Wisconsin or Minnesota or Michigan or like any of the swing states that she fucking lost that were reliably blue states, really.
Yeah, and I think in the past several years, the association between Hillary Clinton and hacked emails, private emails, email server, like these sort of phrases, is very, very, very negative because of Libya and Benghazi and her use of a private server while she was Secretary of State. So even though this really doesn't have anything to do with that, it doesn't matter. This in itself, I don't think was that effective on the campaign, but her past association with quote unquote emails is very bad.
Yeah. I mean, to that point, I think a lot of people can't even distinguish the two. Whenever they hear emails, they think about Benghazi and her private server, even though these emails and this hack has nothing to do with Benghazi. Completely separate instances of emails, I guess.
Exactly.
Also, as an aside, longtime listeners will also recall our episode on QAnon and Pizzagate. And Pizzagate, and again with the gates, started with the Podesta leaks, these same Podesta leaks, where like various sort of inane, banal emails about pizza, food, ordering food for the campaign, whatever, were grasped by right-wing fringe, commentators, to claim that those terms for food were actually references to satanic pedophilia. Overall, I mean, this bit is proof of the false consciousness, I believe, that has gripped American people because, the leaks show, rampant corruption of political dynasties like the Clintons, including, war crimes in Libya and so on. But the American mind is so thoroughly hijacked by the immediate response is to focus on completely unfounded and frankly disturbing and unhinged delusions about child sex trafficking cults instead of like normal corruption, if you will.
Yeah, we go into it in a lot more detail on the QAnon episode. I think that was episode 8, if you want to go back and check it out. But the whole thing just evolved into such a mess. Mess is an understatement.
A disaster, a debacle.
A catastrophe. But let's look at what we know. So we know that somebody hacked the DNC and Clinton campaign's emails and released them to the public via WikiLeaks. That is certain. What is likely is that Russia and other companies and corporations like Cambridge Analytica weaponize social media to spread certain propaganda and influence political opinions. The US government is guilty of this as well. So what is speculation? Well, the United States intelligence and several cybersecurity firms state that the hacks originated in Russia. But again, there is no smoking gun, such as evidence of someone high up in the Russian government ordering the hacks and information releases. Russia and WikiLeaks deny that the Kremlin had anything to do with it.
Okay, what bothers me about this are the double standards, because what is the difference between Russia paying some like Serb teenagers to post memes online and the United Arab Emirates funding the Atlantic Council and their fucking hack journalists? It's all fun and games when Saudi Arabia pays Thomas Friedman to sort of meander about Riyadh for a bit and then write an absolutely dull, inane PR fluff piece for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in the New York Times, basically whitewashing bin Salman's role in the genocide in Yemen. But then when Russians post memes, it's like, oh no, the cunning Asiatics are, manipulating our poor, docile American brains. I mean, the difference here is like lobbying is just legalized bribery, and half the foreign policy PACs and think tanks are being funded by basically either Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Israel, or all of the above. And how is that not influencing US democracy?
We know that other countries try to influence their neighbors and so on through lobbying, social media campaigns, etc. But I think foreign influence, be it Russian, Saudi, what have you, is sort of a red herring in Trump's rise to power again, because it distracts us from the fact that he endorses capitalism and white supremacy and instead focuses our attention on this one small portion of potential crookedness. And to bring up Michael Brooks again, he said that there are some sketchy connections between Donald Trump's team and Russian oligarchs. But again, Russia isn't why Trump ran and won on a platform of bigotry and xenophobia.
I absolutely agree, and rest in peace, Michael Brooks. We lost a hero. I do think there's an interesting point about how liberals have become so fixated on this tenuous Russia connection, because the Russia connection is the only, not difference per se, but I guess what's interesting is that because they don't want to self-reflect, right? They don't want any reflection to be made on the Democratic Party and its apparatus and frankly, it's politics. Because at the end of the day, I mean, Trump is an outright crass xenophobe and a nationalist and a freak, but his underlying buy-in into the capitalist system and the imperialist system abroad is, to me, no different from Hillary Clinton. She would have basically done the same thing, just not as boorish about it. To blame Russia is to distract from how utterly impotent and completely hollow the Democratic Party has become under the sort of liberal third-wave politics.
There was just disaster on top of disaster in the Hillary campaign, but really the tragedy is that the Democrats sold out basically to the center-right, thinking that they could pull people away from Trump's base by essentially mimicking his xenophobia and bigotry. But it didn't work. Like, not only is it terrible, but it didn't fucking work.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it was Chuck Schumer who said, like, for every one working class voter we lose in the Rust Belt, we'll gain 2 suburban middle class voters in, like, Virginia or Texas or wherever. to your point, you mentioned earlier about, the shooting in Ferguson, the shooting of Tamir Rice, etc., etc. All of this happened under the Obama administration, shooting of Tamir Rice, shooting of Trayvon Martin, the fucking absolute depravity of the American healthcare system, drone strikes on American kids abroad in Yemen. All of this happened under Obama, and Obama was elected in 2008 with a huge mandate under the assumption of change, hope, sort of like, we're going to go move past that. But then as soon as he walks into office, he assigns Rahm Emanuel, like a chief of staff, and he basically stacks up his cabinet with Wall Street execs and so on. I don't blame the American people, not the Trump voters, mind you, but I don't blame the sort of apathetic people who didn't vote in 2016 or just simply found Hillary too repulsive because, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
I think the Democratic Party now has this huge issue as well, where they're basically running on a platform of civility and fine, good, whatever. We shouldn't be using slurs. We shouldn't be deliberately throwing terrible words at people. But I really don't care about civility. I want healthcare.
Yeah, fucking Biden's acceptance speech was let the light beat the darkness or some fucking dumb anime shit like that. And it's yeah, but how is light gonna help people who are six figures in medical debt?
Pete Buttigieg is the absolute king of that. He says so many words and managed to say nothing at all.
Oh, he's a fucking alpha when it comes to that. The guy's a psychopath. The guy is a clear-eyed psychopath. I'm pretty sure Chasen is just there as a CIA prop. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, did you see a video of Pete Buttigieg when he was still campaigning when the lights went out and he basically all his fucking supporters started waving their phones around with a flash on?
I did see that obviously staged video.
It was so staged. It was so fake. It was the most CIA psyop shit ever.
Anyway, how are those bread prices in Toronto?
Thankfully, because he fucked off, they're back to normal. But yeah, thanks, Pete. Really, thank you. We appreciate, you rigging bread prices. That's the thing about people like Buttigieg, by the way. To me, they're more terrifying than any depiction of a CIA agent in video games. Or, you know how in video games or shows or whatever, the CIA agent is someone in 24 where they're sweaty with sunglasses on.
It's G.I. Joe. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm no, these people are freaks because they can literally kill hundreds of thousands of people by manipulating numbers on an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, I think we should also point out too how we were discussing about foreign intervention earlier. Troop withdrawals, while I agree that in pretty much all circumstances they are a good thing, of course we all want troops to be in America and not acting as police in other people's countries. That's a given.
I'm a pro-troop, Erin. I support all the troops. Every side.
All sides.
Yeah, I support all the sides. Viet Cong, the IRA. I support all the troops.
Yeah, I think it's probably the actually least controversial thing you can say about war is well, we should bring the troops home. That's no controversy at all. But that being said, war is now conducted via unmanned drones, and you can drop a bomb on someone in Baghdad from a warehouse in Colorado. So just because the number of troops on the ground is going down doesn't mean that the war is de-escalating necessarily.
Yeah, it's just become more automated and efficient, I guess.
Let's move on to part 3 of our analysis, which I have titled Bring in the Clowns, because even though we've already discussed some clownery like Trump and Felix Sater, this is where it really gets buffoonish.
This is the bit where the clown car shows up and literally clowns just keep coming out of the car.
Our first clown is Paul Manafort. Manafort had been a Republican Party consultant who previously worked on the campaigns of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Manafort left the U.S. for a while to work as a political and business strategist in Russia and Ukraine, including for the 2010 presidential campaign of Viktor Yanukovych. Manafort was later charged for engaging in conspiracy and fraud during this campaign. He was convicted on several charges and sent to prison, but he's out now because of COVID.
Okay, just as an aside, This sounds strangely like some archaic 19th century sedition laws. Very vague, like what exactly is conspiracy against the US?
In this case, it's what they call organized tax fraud and stuff like that. He defrauded the United States by not paying his taxes, so the victim of the crime is the US government. It's like how charges will be the people of the state of New York versus so-and-so, like if you murder someone.
Right, okay, that makes sense. Fair enough.
Because that person can't charge you because they're dead. The same way, like, I don't charge Paul Manafort with not paying his taxes because I'm just Aaron.
My favorite case historically is Aaron v. Paul Manafort 2020.
Our second clown is Trump's very own protege, Donald Jr. June 3rd of 2016, Donald Trump Jr. receives an email from Rob Goldstone, a British publicist and one of the figures involved in trying to build Trump Tower Moscow. Goldstone claims that the aforementioned pop star/billionaire's son, Amin Agalarov, has good news. Vladimir Putin wants Donald Trump to win the presidential election. Why the Russian prime minister would give this information to a pop star to funnel to Donald Trump Jr. is never explained. Goldstone also tells Don Jr. that Russia's prosecutor general, Yuri Shaika, has some dirt on Hillary Clinton that he wants to share.
Again, not quite sure why Russia would be so invested in Trump himself. The guy's an idiot and an imbecile, so I don't know. I'm still not convinced.
Donald Trump Jr. responds to this email, quote, "If it's what you say, I love it," end quote. On June 9th, 2016, Donald Trump Jr. and Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, are set to meet with Russian officials in Trump Tower. But these Russian officials didn't offer them any valuable information about Hillary Clinton or her campaign. So, what do we know? Well, for sure, Donald Trump ran a campaign full of characters with ties to wealthy Russian and Ukrainian business interests. He's also a nepotistic brute who seeks to employ and enrich his own family members. Donald Trump Jr. et al. Thought they would get dirt on Hillary Clinton, and whether this incriminating information existed or not, they took the bait. What is speculation, though, is whether this compromising information ever really existed.
My position on this is simple: all's fair in love and war. Also, by the way, the Venn diagram of people crying about corruption at this, and the people who were basically dead mute when it was revealed that Biden got his son this fake job on the board of a Ukrainian natural gas company, is more or less a circle, really. On this as well, the other thing I wanted to mention is, like, it's, again, going back to earlier, like, there's no difference to me between Donald Trump connections to wealthy Russian and Ukrainian business interests and someone like Hillary Clinton and her connections to, like, Qataris and Israeli business interests. It's all fucking the same. They're all corrupt. Hillary fucking used information to try and crush Bernie. They're ghouls. This is just a side gig. Blaming Russia for America's inherent failures is a cop-out. That's the word I was looking for, a cop-out, yeah. I did want to end this episode by touching on an ironic bit of history, if you will, basically flipping the board and discussing US intervention in Russia in the 90s that basically led to Putin running Russia now and the rise of Russian oligarchs. As you all know, Russia used to be part of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, the Soviet Union, whatever you want to call it. In 1991, a little-known man by the name of Boris Yeltsin wins election for presidency of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, which is basically the Russian part of the Soviet Union. This is the first time it was a presidency. It used to be like a different title, but it's now a presidency for each Soviet republic. In December of 1991, the USSR completely collapses, and Russia becomes a fully sovereign and separate Russian federation, while other Soviet republics become their own thing, their own country. To keep in mind, the presidency terms are of 5 years, which means the next election will be in 1996. In the meantime, until 1996, the collapse of the Soviet Union leads to the biggest drop in life expectancy in peacetime Europe. Lifetime expectancy for men and women in Russia drops from 64 and 74, respectively, to 58 and 71. Just a collapse of quality of life everywhere. There's a widespread looting of the Russian economy, where people who had connections to the elite before the collapse basically just buy out various natural resources, various sectors of the economy. The US basically backs all of this. It's important to know how much looting there was. Like, it's just an insane level of theft of public wealth, a scale I don't think has ever been seen before. Fast forward to 1996, and you have the first elections in post-Soviet Russia, the Russian Federation. The competition is between the incumbent, Yeltsin, and I mean, there's a bunch of other candidates, obviously, like a dozen of them. But the two big ones were Yeltsin and Gennady Zhukyanov of the Communist Party. There was a real possibility, because of all of this looting and the collapse of the economy, that the communists will win, because everyone was like, yeah, well, life used to be better under the communists. And the US did not want that to happen. So the US president at the time, Bill Clinton, first of all, he publicly endorses Yeltsin, but that's not enough. So he provides covert US support for Yeltsin, including pushing through a massive IMF loan to Russia to make Yeltsin look good. And on that point, I want to reflect, because when Mikhail Gorbachev initially attempted perestroika in Russia, which was basically liberalizing the economy with certain sectors, Gorbachev is an idiot and he's naive. I don't think he was actively malicious. I just think he was a naive moron, because his objective was to transition from a state-planned Soviet economy into a sort of mild social democracy like you'd see in, the Nordic countries. But, the US would not have that. So the US basically withheld. It forced the World Bank and the IMF to withhold loans to Russia to make the economy scream until Yeltsin was elected. And when Yeltsin was elected, the IMF loans went through, and they kept going through to make him look good. And when that didn't work, literal plane loads full of cash were flown from the US to Moscow to basically bribe officials to get Yeltsin over the line, along with several Clinton advisors being sent to work on Yeltsin's campaign. Ultimately, Yeltsin wins the vote for the 1996 presidency with 54.4% of the vote, though there are accusations of widespread corruption, fraud, outright rigging the vote, really. So I just wanted to mention this last bit as a sort of irony of the US pointing fingers at Russian interference when the US pretty much rigged, there's 200 sovereign countries in the world. Of those, at least 120 had elections that were interfered by the US in some way, shape, or form in the last 50 years.
Yeah, we'll definitely do many, many more episodes on Russia, the USSR, the revolution, and such in the future. I think the issue is that for our little podcast, that's such a big undertaking to start in 1905 and go forward with the revolution and the execution of the Romanovs and the murder of Trotsky. There's so much there for a political true crime podcast. And we want to do it. We're going to do it, but it might just take some time. As we've also discussed, Amr and I refuse to do that bullshit thing where we say okay, and that's part 1 of the 1917 Russian Revolution. Go to our Patreon for part 2. We hate that. We hate when people do that. And we pledge, we will never do that to you guys. So don't worry that that's ever going to happen. Russian politics are so interesting, and I think it's especially interesting because as someone born and raised in the United States, reading about Russia is fascinating because you get to learn how wrong you were taught.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Learning about Russia is an adventure into your own mind. I don't think the whole Red Scare stuff, I mean, it was pretty much past when I was a child anyway. I don't think it ever really worked on me, but it's incredible to me how many Americans, for instance, think everything that happens in Russia is bad. I'm pretty sure that they think Moscow is in black and white. There's no color there.
It's actually incredible how sheltered Americans are. Even when I was traveling abroad, anytime I meet an American, it's always fascinating seeing how limited they are in terms of their understanding of things not even deep stuff, just basic history or knowledge of the place they're in.
Yeah, we do have a reputation for such things. And it's earned in many ways. But the United States is the 3rd or 4th most populated country in the world, so we do have a pretty diverse
Yeah.
population.
If you guys really like this, please do subscribe. Please do rate us. It really helps with our visibility. Tell your friends, tell your Communist Party cadres, make memes of us and post those memes on Facebook. Please do spread the word.
Yeah, you can follow us on Instagram at DasKriminalPod. We do not right now have a Facebook page for these exact reasons.
We'll set up a Facebook page once the FSB start paying us. So keep an eye out on that once we become sponsored by the KGB. So yeah.
Yeah, but we appreciate you guys listening. For our valued Patreon subscribers, we have a full-length bonus episode for our $10 and up patrons this Wednesday, and it is the long, long awaited O.J. Simpson trial.
The big one, if you will, the one that started this idea of true crime podcast.
Yeah, so join us on Patreon if you'd like. Otherwise, we will see you guys Monday for another free episode. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, have a good week, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.